Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Meeple Empire. And this week, our rather ghostly, almost squirrely-like Palmer has decided to return. As always, I'm JR. And we have a lot to catch up on. I figured this week we would kind of start off going back a few weeks and discuss New York Comic Con 2017. Now, are you going to be statuesque, or are you actually going to talk?
I'm not actually here. I'm just a cardboard cutout.
Fuck off. So nothing has changed in your time away. So, cardboard cutout Palmer, would you like to talk about your experience at Comic-Con 2017, whereas you had the opportunity to work that and Boston?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, working it is different because you don't get to walk around as much or do all the things, even though there's ton more to do at New York than there is Boston. New York is the East Coast version of San Diego, whereas Boston Comic Con, it's trying to branch out and trying to get bigger. Now that it's owned by Fan Expo, I think it might take the next step. But Boston is always nice, or was nice, because there would be a lot more comic creators there. There's still media people, but Boston never kind of lost that core of comic creators. New York tends to have a ton just because it's New York. Although this year Artist Alley was smaller because of upgrades going on in the convention hall. They tore down the part of the building that Artist Alley used to be in, and they're building like a 3-story attachment. So in the coming years, the convention can even get bigger.
well, personally, my experience with New York Comic Con, I found Boston to be far more enjoyable. I mean, we got up there early enough that we could get in on a Saturday, and we beat the rush. We were kind of in that first flute of people rushing in. But unlike Boston, where you had like that probably hour, a little bit more to actually navigate everything and do kind of some shopping before it had become claustrophobic. New York, it had felt like you would hit the floor, maybe you looked at a booth or two, and that place was already shoulder to shoulder in record time. I think we only got 15 minutes of actual breathable enjoyment before it was so claustrophobic. You're bouncing into people trying to do anything. With them losing the Artist Alley's hall and kind of doing it the way they did, I mean, I was there for one reason mainly, and we'll discuss that in a few minutes. But there were other artists there that I had met at Boston that were also in New York. I would have loved to have the opportunity to kind of see what they were working on, and I couldn't even find them.
There was a giant banner that said Artist Alley.
Artists
There was giant banners all over the place. How you could not find anything at New York is beyond me. The city is in a grid system. The convention is essentially in a grid system. Every aisle has like 30,000 foot tall banners saying what aisle you're in.
I don't know if it was just the amount of people in such a small place. I don't know what it was that forced me to just be...
That place isn't small.
It was enormous, and it was packed wall to wall.
Yeah, that's what a convention is.
No, Boston was nothing like that.
Because Boston's not as good.
Now, I really enjoyed Boston.
Boston is fine for what it is, but when you talk actual comic convention, it's New York. I mean, I've been to New York. This is my 3rd time going, and this is actually the first time I've been there on the really busy days, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. New York is 4 days and typically sells out 3 of the 4 days. The only day it doesn't typically sell out, unless it sells out that day, is Thursday. It's the middle, it's the week. People have jobs. Not everyone can just take a day off from work. So this is the first time I've only ever been there on Thursday, because that's the days I've been able to get tickets through work. Being there on Friday and Saturday this time around, like I didn't find nearly as much of a problem moving around as I've had in Boston before. The aisles are wide enough. You can, if you're walking to and from anything, there'll be a little bit of congestion, but it doesn't feel, I've never felt trapped where you're not moving, and I've had that problem at Boston.
I don't know, part of me would like to think about the numbers, like how many Boston draw versus how many New York draw, because Boston's a smaller convention, but I also felt they drew a fraction of what New York did.
Yeah, New York draws the most people for any convention.
So they're drawing in more than San Diego?
Yes, and that's only because San Diego does not have, it's essentially down to the buildings that they're in. Like, they've both maxed out the space and they've both maxed out attendance, but the Javits Center can fit more people in than the convention center in San Diego. So it's just a matter of the space can fit more. So yeah, it draws more than San Diego per person, and it's just because there's, like, San Diego can't expand. The Javits is always finding a way to expand. Like, they've expanded that center several times.
Like I said, on positive notes, the cosplay was on a whole nother level in New York. So that was ramped up. A lot of the interaction, the booth interaction, was on a much higher level than in Boston. Like, you know, similar to PAX, where you had different booths from some of, like, the sci-fi television shows where they had all these fancy camera setups. You were allowed to put yourself in those environments and take free photos. A lot of that, you know, New York had that tenfold, way past what Boston had. And that was nice. So you had a lot of that interaction. Like I said, I don't know if I just had such a claustrophobic feeling that I didn't use my common sense to try to use the aisles and locate what I wanted to see. But, I mean, again, the main goal was, again, like we're going to talk with InferNoct. One of the main goals was right before the convention had started, you had sent me a message informing me that they had a con exclusive book.
Yeah.
And you had went up to the con, we lost contact, and I wanted to make sure that I didn't miss out on the book. I knew I did have the one-day pass, and maybe next year I'll go for all 4 days, and maybe that'll change my experience when I have the proper amount of time to just really navigate. But that was my main goal, was to get there, get this book, meet with Mina again, and have the book autographed. Whereas when I met her in Boston, we had a really great conversation. I loved what they had brought to the table in Boston, even though I wasn't able to physically take a comic away from it. But
yeah, you could take an ash can.
I took the small book in the paper, but I couldn't take any of these.
Well, it's hard to take something that doesn't exist.
So now that it existed, I wanted the opportunity to get there and get that book signed. And, you know, again, I got there early. We got the book early. She didn't arrive until a little bit later in the day. We had come back.
She has a life.
Well, you know, we went back.
She was probably busy filling out a restraining order.
That could be a thing. You know, just like with, what's her face? The redhead who turns around and probably has multiple restraining orders on you in many countries?
No. Karen Gillan has called me Superman. So, I'm winning at life and you are not.
This may be in your dreams. You sure this isn't a figment of your imagination?
This happened at Rhode Island a couple years ago. We had a picture together. She called me Superman. It was great. We had a shared moment.
Well, you know, I had a good conversation with her yet again. When she arrived, she autographed my book, which I am over the moon of.
I'm just saying.
We're going to need some clarity on this, is what we're going to need. We're going to need some user interaction here to see who's the creeper, me or him.
You. We have photos that we've seen that it's definitely you.
We haven't shown the audience a picture of you next to the said redhead.
That's because it's in a safe deposit box.
And that's not creepy.
That thing I have valued at more than my children's lives.
And that's not creepy.
You realize how much money that picture cost?
Anyway, moving on from this nonsense, I'm going to try to get us back on track.
Yeah. Good luck.
We're gonna kind of forgo TV, cinema, and board games and talk exclusively about books and comics and books, comic books, and I wanted to talk about what we have here: Scout Comics InferNoct. As you can see, I have all 3 covers, and one of them has a beautiful signature on it. But this is a book.
Actually, it looks faded.
It was just. You know what?
Did you put it in there too fast?
You know what? She put it in there, first of all. And second of all, the marker was probably dying, so it doesn't look as cool as yours. But it's still autographed.
I'm just saying, that means she likes me more than you. It's essentially what that means.
I hope that's not the case, because I'm the one with the skill, and you're the one with the mouth.
Yeah.
Anywho.
You only have the 3 covers?
If there's more I swear to God, I'm gonna slap the shit out of you. Was there more than 3 covers?
Oh, yeah. Apparently you're not as big a fan as you think you are. I have all the covers.
We will be reaching out, because this will need to be rectified like yesterday. But anywho, I met Mina at Boston Comic Con. Their display was very Cthulhu-esque. You know, out of all the displays in Artist Alley, it was one of the 2 that just drew me in, just on pure presentation alone. I found myself the first day kind of just buzzing by it. By the second day, I had kind of gone over with my wife, and we talked to Mina, and she had another assistant there. And then before we left, I had finally gone over, and that's when I had gotten the mini, like, kind of pre-book and a pamphlet that was very Resident Evil-esque about the story. She had given me kind of a lot of the information, and at that point, I had talked to you about potentially getting it in the shop. From there, I kind of just waited patiently. Was able to get my hands on.
By waiting patiently, he means asking me every week if that book has come out yet.
Just so you know, this was a thing, and I had to have my hands on it. But anywho, so that being said, I knew how I felt about it, and generally, anytime I like or want something, you pretty much, kill it, shoot it, hate on it, piss on it, do whatever you have to do to trash it. In this instance, you did get the opportunity to get the book before me.
Yep,
which was quite freaking heartbreaking. But
and read it before you.
You're an ass. So why don't you, before I kind of go on about how I feel about it, why don't you give me your impressions on book 1?
Okay. So it's a horror comic. And we've talked about our love for horror movies on this in the past. And, like, I really love horror movies. I love good horror movies. I love, quote-unquote, bad horror movies and cheesy horror movies. As long as I get the feeling that I want out of a horror movie, doesn't matter if, like, the acting's not up to par or that. I go and watch horror movies to have that tense feeling. If I get that tense feeling, then the movie's done its job. Now, that being said, I typically don't read horror stuff. I don't read horror comic books for the most part, and I don't read horror books. I've done books on tape for, like, Stephen King and that. The biggest problem I have when I'm reading a horror book is I don't get that feeling. I don't get, like, that tense, creeping feeling that you get from watching a movie, because all of it's there on the page. And especially in comics, if you have 2 pages open with pictures, if there's something hiding and the book is done incorrectly, you'll see it on the second page before flipping over, so you don't have that suspense.
Okay.
So that being said, you did tell me about this comic, and at Boston I went over and talked to her a bit, and she told me what the comic was about. I took home the small ash can copy, and then when I went to New York, I was gonna pick up the exclusive for you, and I met her again, and I even told her, I was like, oh, I've been waiting for this book to come out. I'm picking it up for a customer of mine, and she asked me to read it and to tweet out my opinions of it. I ended up doing that, but I told her I would let her know what my thoughts were, just in case. I didn't suspect I was gonna have any negative thoughts, but it's always nice to be like, look, I'm gonna tell you ahead of time what I would say about this book. So I read it that night, and for a first issue, first issue setup in any story. Sometimes the setup can be slow, sometimes the setup can be fast. This does a good job at getting it going, getting the story going within one issue, that like you can't wait to read the second issue to see what's going to go, like where it's going to go, because it kind of went in a different direction than I thought it was. But my biggest takeaway from this is it felt like the start of a horror movie to me. And it felt like the start of like a good horror movie. And like I've read horror stuff in the past. I don't typically like to. But this succeeded in my mind where so many other things failed. And that's based in no small part to the really good writing and setup of this story, and it's paired beautifully with Eli Powell's very creepy style of art. The art fits the book so well, that like this is a really good combination of story and art meeting together, which you need on a comic, but typically doesn't happen as well as it happens in this book.
Now, you had the benefit, obviously, of reading the book early, or before and like I'll buy multiple copies of the same thing because with my first copy, I like to keep untouched. So when I got my autographed copy and my variant art, that was not opened. It literally, Mina's hands were the last hands to wield that book.
While he was gone, I ripped out a page of one of them.
Slapped the shit out of you. So by the time I got my hand on it and in a position to actually read it, it was actually your copy.
Yeah.
And you were able to kind of gauge my reactions immediately. And I mean, I kind of digested it initially, stepped back, thought about what I looked at, kind of came back in. And, my takeaways from it were, and again, as a horror fan, and to be absolutely honest, I probably err on the side of more B-level horror than I do mainstream. That's where I kind of find my most enjoyment.
Yeah.
I felt that all of my expectations based off of my previous conversations and the feeling I got from the booth and just dealing with Mina were all not only met, but they were exceeded. I felt that the coloring of the book, the style of the book, like Mina's story, I don't think it could be any better crafted in image than it was.
Right.
And that first book, just kind of the overall pacing, I feel like when you read it, you get these, like almost like this deja vu undertones as you kind of go through your first few pages. Like some of it like you felt or you've seen before. And I think that for me helped me to kind of come into it and build the tension.
Yeah. There's definitely, you could, like, if you if you are around enough horror stuff, I always feel bad, like, when I say, oh, it has, like, especially this happens with horror. Like, I always feel bad if you say, like, well, it feels like this horror movie, or it has these tropes, because I'm always afraid that it kind of sounds like you're diminishing the originality of a story. But that being said, like, the reason there are tropes is because tropes work. The really good stuff works. And the same thing with setup for a horror movie.
No, for me, I think it was the I don't know that I'd put it in a trope, but I think the familiarity to other things was just close enough to pull you in and give you false expectations.
Yeah.
Like, there's a big reveal in this first book, and I mean, if nothing else, they know how to end the book.
Yeah.
They really do, because you get, in your final couple pages, you get this big reveal. And honestly, leading into it, and again, I pay a lot of attention to color, and tone. So, I'm paying a lot of attention to the colors. I'm watching some colors kind of transition a little.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get this, this reveal, and then bang, it's done.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how much, like, it left me wanting for more with the way it ended. Like, I just, like, instantly, I'm like, it almost felt like a season ender of Game of Thrones. Like, you get there and you're like, it's powerful. You don't know which way to go with it. You don't know where it's going, which forced me to look at, Eli had an actual page autograph, a signed page, so you know that that's an important piece of art for him. Like, it left me going back to that page and, like, really psychoanalyzing, probably unneededly.
Yes.
But psychoanalyzing all the imagery in that, and breaking down the events that were happening versus all the different things going on this one exclusive page.
Yeah.
And for me, I don't think a book could leave me in any better of a position. Because I'm not only longing for what would follow, but I'm thinking about what I've just read.
Right.
It's not something that you plow through the pages, you throw it down, you move on to the next book, and you forget about it until the following month when another book hits the shelf. This was something that I was able to kind of go through the pages and not only want to see what was to come, but also left me thinking about what I had just read.
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, that's not easily achieved for me.
It does seem the book ends in a different place than what it feels like it's going at the start. At the start, I would say I got the vibe I got, and I don't want this to sound like I'm diminishing the originality of the story, because I think it's really original, and it's just done so well, is I got the vibe of, like, Lights Out. Like, the panel of, like, her with all the lamps around, sitting there, and she's told, like, never, make sure that not all of the lamps go out. Some can go out, but you always have to have some light on.
Yep.
And even the old man that she's taking care of, he's surrounded by these lamps. And then there's a scene in which you just see the lamps, like, randomly start going off. And that's the kind of vibe I got, and I liked. I didn't love Lights Out. I felt there were some issues with it, but, like, I liked the concept.
Okay.
The concept of, like, the creatures can only come in when there's little light, or there's no light. Like, it can't survive in the light. So I got, like, that vibe, and I'm like, oh, this is almost like a better version of that concept.
Okay. And
then the end kind of feels like it's going to go in a different direction. Like that's going to be the concept of the creatures, it seems like. But this is more of like I wouldn't necessarily say like Van Helsing style hunt. But that's kind of like where I think it's going. Like, they're going to now hunt these creatures.
Like like I said, and again, you have the benefit of you watched me as I kind of went through it. So, as I got those initial images, the first couple pages, you're kind of like, okay, well, where am I? I'm getting my bearings.
Yep.
By the time you got, and again, I don't want to give too much away. By the time you got to where she picked up the phone, and that phone automatically did what it did.
Yep.
Like, by the time I got there, I was like,
Yeah,
like,
that was a nice little surprise.
Yeah, that is where I started to feel like that, at that point, that familiarity.
Right.
Like, it was definitely unique, and it wasn't like anything that I've seen before, but there was a familiarity to that, to other things that was like, okay, well, what do you expect? It builds that suspense, and that's very hard to do in print.
Yeah.
It's not like we're reading a novel here and it's theater of the mind.
Right.
Whereas you read,
this has very blatant pictures.
Absolutely.
That being said, like, I really like this cover. I really like the cover. But like, it almost seems like the color palette on this cover is not necessarily indicative of the comic. Like, the color palette is a little bit darker than this cover.
Yeah.
And the color palette...
It's more true to our exclusive and the variant.
The color palette I really like. I don't know if like the dull blunted colors is the right word, but like the green is definitely, it's not as bright. It's darker.
It's a muted.
Yeah.
It's a muted palette, and again, like when I was talking about her hair, you can kind of see, and I'm hoping it's intentional, but you can kind of see like a slight transition there. And they are. It's very exaggerated yet muted colors, and everywhere.
Yeah.
The same could be said of the lamp scene that you were talking about. Very, very bright but muted.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. I can't recommend this book enough.
Absolutely
not. It's everything that I was hoping for.
Definitely go out and pick it up. You might have trouble finding it. Unfortunately, it's one of the instances where it's an independent publisher, Scout Comics, who's put out some good stuff in the past. Once Our Land was really popular. Either the beginning of this year or end of last year. That came out and sold out right away. Went to a few different printings. And they've done some other books that people have liked. But Once Our Land was like their big hit. Like when Black Mass came on, we had there was We Can Never Go Home by Matthew Rosenberg, which was a huge hit. So independent books typically get ordered lower. So you might have and I what I had in came out today. I got it in and I sold out about midway through the day. So
it's a good thing for the book, though.
Yeah, and I'm hoping it's like that in other shops. So while I hope you can go find a copy, I also kind of hope you have to go to a few different places, because this book deserves to be noticed, deserves to sell out. And I know like making movies of comics is like the in thing to do, even if it's not just superhero stuff. There's a lot of comic book properties getting optioned for shows and movies. Crosswinds got announced, which was a really good book from Image. But like, I really hope this gets... Right now, I'm going to say I really hope it gets a TV series treatment, maybe on like Hulu, or a place that can do a horror show right. Like I always kind of feel like it's a cop out to say I want it to be on HBO or Hulu or Netflix, because you can do whatever you want. But at the same time, I like when I want a horror stuff, I don't want it dulled down to have to worry about like selling advertising on ABC.
I just want to back you up 1 second on this.
Yeah.
Though I do agree. I think Mina's storytelling thus far. And I mean, we've been lucky enough that we've had the opportunity to read book 2. Though,
I haven't.
well, we're not going to discuss that anyway. As not to give any spoilers, we will discuss that in a future episode. But I think the story that Mina is crafting is fantastic.
Yeah.
And though I do agree that giving this kind of like an episodic something would be not only warranted, but could be good for it, I don't want to take anything away from what Eli's done with it. You know?
Well, you wouldn't be able to copy his artwork, obviously, but you can use that. Like, you can take his inspiration and morph it into a TV series. Like, you can take the color palette.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. You could use
and you can take some of the imagery.
Yeah, you could use this kind of as
like,
a well thought out, well fleshed out storyboard. I don't want to take any credit away from what he's done.
No, and I don't think making it a TV show or a movie would do that, especially if you're taking inspiration from his artwork. I mean, you could even, I mean, it's I don't know how exactly successful it would be. You could always do like an animated horror. And then definitely use his art style as the springboard. But I think there's like he has a lot of distinct imagery in this first issue that you could transition that to the screen and be able to see his stamp on this. Like you'd be able like that looks like how he drew it.
I can dig. I just again
he's definitely important to this concept. Like this is such a perfect team on a book, and I really haven't felt this way about a team.
Keep going.
I really haven't felt this way about a team on a single book since Insects, which was Marguerite Bennett and Ariella. I'm not gonna try to attempt to say her last name because I'm probably gonna butcher it. But like the way the story, the style of the story it was, and her art, just were perfect marriage on that book. That's what it is on this book. Like I can't envision another artist doing this, and it working so well. Just like I couldn't imagine somebody else's writing working as well with the art.
Oh, I mean, I agree with you 100%. You know, like I said, I think this is a home run for Mina and Eli. I think this is a home run for Scout Comics. You know, again, I did get the opportunity to meet a couple other artists with books that'll be coming out.
Yeah.
They weren't quite on the circuit yet. And, I mean, fantastic group of people that they had there at the booth. Yep. You know, again, signatures, prints, kind of the full gambit. I can't say anything more positive about the team that I seen together representing Scout for the New York Comic Con. I hope this isn't all that we see from Mina. I hope that there are other storytelling opportunities that she'll, you know, other creative outlets that she'll bring to the table. Because I truly believe there's a lot of talent, you know, that's probably untapped. If this is any indication of what she's capable of.
Yeah.
You know, again, total thumbs up. Glad to see that the book sold out. Huge props to Mina and Eli, Scout Comics. You know, this is a very highly entertaining property. And hopefully more horror fans and just comic fans alike get out there and give this an opportunity. Because I think that this is the kind of book that once people flip a few pages, they're going to find themselves pleasantly surprised.
Yeah.
And turn this into, you know, a financially stable endeavor for future books to come.
Yeah.
That being said, Scout Comics just put out the pre-sale notice, I think, for book 3. Mm-hmm. You know, so go to your local comic shops. You know, get in there, voice your interest for the book. You know, other comic, because I know, like in the case of, you know, your particular facility, This may not have been something you carried had we not discussed it.
We would have carried it, but we wouldn't have got as many copies of it as we did if you hadn't brought it to my attention. And then when I sat down and looked at it, when I sat down and looked at the preview copy that I got at Boston, and I was able to see it, and I was like, all right, I'm kind of digging this. I want to see where it goes. I think at that point, like, we went up like 5 times our order, which isn't a lot of copies. Like, it wasn't like we went from 10 to 50. We went from like a couple to 10, give or take. And that was because I knew you wanted the book, and I knew that I had an interest in the book, which was enough for me to go, if I really like the first issue, then it's something I can recommend to people who don't necessarily want just the typical superhero fare. People that like independent books. I can at least recommend it to them saying, like, look, this is an independent book, and it's an independent book that I really liked, which doesn't happen all that often. Not saying that I dislike independents, I just typically don't have a lot of time to read them because I am a huge superhero fan. So I'm already reading like 25 books a week, that it's kind of hard for me to kind of fit in the fringe stuff that I might like, but I just I'm never caught up enough to do what I want to.
Well, I can tell you this, having read book number 2, it gets better.
I can't imagine that it wouldn't.
So it gets better, so if, it's uphill from here. And I don't think we've even seen I don't even think we've seen the tip of the iceberg from what this team's going to bring to the table. I can't say what an honor it was to actually receive that advanced copy and get the opportunity to go through, at least for myself. I have nothing more that I can add. Anything that you could?
No, I'm good.
So, again, highly recommended. It's InferNoct from Scout Comics. If you get the opportunity, I urge you guys to get out there and give this one a whirl. I think you'll find that you will be pleasantly surprised. And I'm gonna cut it kind of there. I really wanted to give this our full attention between the con and the book.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you like what you've seen, please comment, rate, and/or subscribe. I'm JR, this is Palmer, saying catch you next time.